In April of 1841, Silas Rutland made a shocking announcement that rippled through the heart of South Carolina, leaving even the most hardened plantation owners speechless. He declared that his daughter, Catherine, a 28-year-old woman tipping the scales at over 260 lives, would be placed under the complete authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross. Not as a mere servant or companion, but as her master in every sense, except on paper. The white elite of Colleton County were scandalized, their world turned upside down by Rutled's audacity. But they had no idea of the sinister forces at play, or the horrors that Ezekiel Cross would unleash on Catherine in the months to come. By November, Catherine's body had changed in ways that defied logic. 13 men lay dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation had been reduced to smoldering ruins. What dark and twisted secret did Ezekiel Cross reveal that terrified everyone who saw it? What exactly did he do to Catherine that left a trail of death and destruction in its wake? Before we dive into the chilling truth, don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, and leave a comment with your state below. Now, let me transport you to where it all began. Spring in Colleton County arrived like a suffocating blanket. Oppressive heat and thick humidity that made the air feel like it was pressing in on you. The Combahee River meandered sluggishly through the lowlands, its dark water a mirror to the Spanish moss that hung from the ancient leaf oak trees like ghostly shrouds. Rice paddies stretched endlessly, their flooded fields worked by hundreds of enslaved hands, trudging through water that reached up to their knees from dawn till dusk. This was the price of wealth, extracted from human suffering, justified by men who believed that cruelty was simply the way of the world. At the heart of it all stood Cypress Grove Plantation, sprawling across 800 acres of land, its beauty masking the dark secrets that would soon come to light. Its owner, Silas Rutland, was a man of ambition, though not quite a member of the county's elite. He owned 58 enslaved people, a fortune by most standards, but it barely elevated him beyond the mid-tier of local society. The true powerhouses in the county were those with vast tracts of land and hundreds of slaves, families who summered in Charleston and sent their children to prestigious universities up north. Their names commanded respect, and a single word from them could open doors or ruin reputations. Silas had married Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, a match that brought with it moderate land holdings and a respected family name. Elizabeth was a woman of practicality, more concerned with keeping meticulous records than climbing the social ladder. She passed away giving birth to a daughter, Catherine, in 1813. For 28 years, Silas raised his daughter alone, while tirelessly working to infiltrate the upper echelons of county power. Silas was a tall, gaunt figure, his thinness a result of neglecting his health in favor of his obsession. His prematurely gray hair gave him a stern, almost forbidding look, one that matched his cold, calculating demeanor. In business, he was known for his sharp mind, making ruthless deals while keeping his word, driving hard bargains, but never breaking promises. His daughter, Catherine, grew up in isolation, educated by tutors and never fully fitting in anywhere. By 1841, Catherine was 28 years old and weighed nearly 260 lbs. A result of the numerous medications she had been prescribed for what doctors diagnosed as hysteria and female nervous disorders. These medications caused her body to swell, and she suffered from violent fits, where she would scream and throw objects in fits of uncontrollable rage. 1 year prior, she had attacked her father with a letter opener, leaving a scar across his left hand. The town whispered about Catherine with feigned sympathy. Poor Silas Rutland, they would murmur, burdened with a mad daughter. How tragic! She had been such a beautiful child. But none of them knew the truth. None of them understood what Catherine had seen when she was just 12 years old, nor did they realize that her so-called madness wasn't madness at all. It was a rational response to living in the presence of monsters. The letter arrived on the 7th of April, brought by private courier. Silas opened it in his study, expecting it to be just another business letter. Instead, he found 3 pages on expensive paper, sealed with red wax and emblazoned with a symbol he knew all too well, a scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the Brethren of the Harvest. The Brethren, 13 men who gathered in secret to perform rituals they believed strengthened the land through blood sacrifice, had fused old European customs with practices learned from enslaved people who had knowledge of spirits and power. They believed the strong were meant to dominate the weak. Literally, when necessary, Silas had been initiated into the Brethren in 1822 and had attended nearly 40 of their gatherings over 19 years, participating in rituals that ranged from unsettling to downright monstrous. The letter informed him he was deeply in debt, 12.000, a sum accumulated over years of failed investments and gambling losses. Repayment would require selling off most of his land and all of his slaves, destroying everything he had worked for. But there was another option, a demonstration of commitment, a solution for those in particularly dire straits. Silas could take his daughter, Catherine, and place her completely under the authority of one of his enslaved men. Not temporarily, not as punishment, but as a genuine transfer of responsibility for an entire year. The enslaved man would have full control over her, her movements, her daily activities, and how she was treated. Silas would then announce this publicly at a gathering of the county's prominent families, framing it as an extreme medical measure for his daughter's condition. The humiliation would be total. In a society that revered white women as precious and protected, Silas would be openly declaring his daughter to be of lesser value than his property. If Silas agreed, his debt would be forgiven, and the brethren would offer him the financial support he needed to restore his former position. Silas sat in his study for hours that night, weighing his options. Bankruptcy would ruin him completely, but the brethren had their hands in every judge's pocket, every lawyer's file, every politician's campaign. They could make him disappear without a trace if he became a liability. Or he could sacrifice his daughter's dignity to preserve his own power. A decision society had long conditioned him to make. Property over people. Power over morality. By candlelight, Silas wrote his acceptance and sent it before dawn. 3 days later, another letter arrived with a name and brief history. Ezekiel Cross, aged 33. Recently purchased through an intermediary from a Virginia plantation. He had skills in carpentry and herbal medicine, with a temperament listed as quiet and obedient. What the letter didn't reveal was that Ezekiel Cross had been chosen for this very purpose. His placement at Cypress Grove was no accident. He carried with him a deep, burning need for justice, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Ezekiel arrived on the 13th of April, riding in a wagon driven by a slave trader named Henderson. The wagon pulled directly to the main house, an oddity since most slave transactions took place near the barns. Silas stepped onto the porch, shielding his eyes from the harsh morning sun. In the wagon bed sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noticed was the intensity of his eyes. Most enslaved people instinctively kept their gaze low as a survival instinct, but not Ezekiel. He met Silas' eyes directly, his expression calm, as if he were sizing him up. It unsettled Silas, and that discomfort curled in his gut. Ezekiel stood tall, perhaps 6'2", his frame wide and strong, hardened by a lifetime of relentless labor. His skin was smooth, unmarred by the familiar signs of violence, whip marks, the scars of punishment. His clothes were simple, but they were clean, unlike the worn and threadbare garments of most enslaved men. His hands were calloused, yet his fingers moved with a precision that spoke not of raw strength, but of craftsmanship. Henderson climbed down from the wagon, passing Silas a bundle of papers. Ezekiel crossed as requested. Previous owner says he's quiet, but capable. Your associates want you to know he was carefully selected. Silas barely glanced at the papers, dismissing them with a wave. His attention was fixed on Ezekiel. You understand why you're here? Yes, sir. Ezekiel's voice was deep, even with a slight Virginia drawl. My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her care. Doctors have failed. You claim knowledge of herbal remedies. My grandmother was a healer. Sir, Ezekiel replied, the weight of the past hanging in his words. She taught me before I was sold. The deal was struck in silence. Ezekiel was shown to a small cabin on the outskirts of the estate. isolated from the rest of the quarters. A few basic supplies were provided, and he was informed his duties would begin the following day. His sole responsibility was Catherine's care, and failure was not an option. Ezekiel nodded, giving a brief, "Yes, sir," before being left alone. Once the door closed behind him, Ezekiel allowed himself a moment to breathe. His jaw relaxed, his shoulders, which had been tense with the weight of the past few days, dropped. He sat on the edge of the bed and carefully pulled out a small cloth bundle from under his shirt. Unwrapping it, he revealed a piece of worn paper with 3 names scrawled in a child's shaky handwriting: Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. His wife, his son, and his daughter. Sold away to a plantation in Alabama known for working its slaves to death. The names were a reminder of the family he had lost, of the cruelty of the system that had torn them apart. They were dead now. Sarah, who had succumbed to fever, Benjamin, whose injury turned septic, and Ruth, who had given up, a 6-year-old who simply stopped eating when she couldn't understand why her family was torn apart. And Silas, Rutald had been the one to sell them, not for money, not for any reason other than to show the others in his circle that he could make ruthless decisions without feeling. He had broken a family to prove a point. Ezekiel had spent the past 2 years making his way south, each sale deliberate, each plantation a stepping stone. He gathered whispers about the brethren and their dark rituals. He learned that these men, the ones like Rutald, believed themselves above reproach, and when the opportunity arose to be sold to Rutald, Ezekiel knew he had a chance. Access to Rutald's house, his secrets, his weaknesses. Sometimes, justice wasn't about the courts or the laws. It came from patience, from planning, from becoming as monstrous as the men you were going to destroy. He folded the paper and tucked it back into his shirt. The weight of the names sat heavily on him as he lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, already planning the next steps. The next day, Ezekiel's first task was to meet Catherine. Judith, a house slave with graying hair and a tired expression, led him up the stairs to Catherine's room on the 2nd floor. She knocked reluctantly. "Miss Catherine," she said softly, "your father has brought someone to help with your treatments." There was a crash from inside, a heavy object hitting the wall. And then Catherine's voice, slurred but venomous, filled the air. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith turned to Ezekiel, her face filled with sympathy. "She has bad days. This is one of them." Ezekiel stepped into the room before Judith could follow, closing the door quietly behind him. The room was large but suffocatingly dark, with heavy curtains drawn, blocking out the sunlight. The air was thick, the smell of stale bedding mixing with the nauseating sweetness of mercury. Books were scattered across the floor, a shattered picture leaning against the wall. clothes thrown everywhere. Catherine sat by the cold fireplace, wrapped in a stained dressing gown. Her dark hair hung in tangled, greasy strands, and her face was puffy, eyes glazed over. Her hands trembled uncontrollably on the chair's armrests. She looked up at Ezekiel with a mixture of confusion, fear, and fury. "Who are you?" she demanded. I said, "No more doctors." "I am not a doctor, miss." Ezekiel replied calmly. "My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help?" Catherine laughed harshly. "That's what they all say. Help, treatment, medicine. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She rose suddenly, swaying, her body unsteady. "I know what this is. He's punishing me again. For remembering, for speaking, for refusing to forget." Ezekiel stood still, his hands at his sides, non-threatening. "What are you supposed to forget?" The question stopped her. For a brief moment, the anger in her eyes flickered, replaced by something far more vulnerable. "You do not know." "I know nothing, miss," Ezekiel replied. "Only that your father says you are unwell." Catherine studied him more closely now, as if truly seeing him for the first time. "You are not from here." "Virginia," he said, his voice steady. "Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's pulse quickened, but he held his composure, his face betraying nothing. "I do not know what you mean." "Lear." The word had no venom, just an exhausted acceptance. "Everyone lies. It's easier than the truth." She collapsed back into the chair, exhaling with frustration. "Leave me alone. Tell my father his newest torment failed." But Ezekiel walked toward the window, pulling the curtains back. Sunlight poured into the room, harsh and bright. Catherine recoiled, covering her eyes. "When did you last go outside, miss?" "I cannot walk that far. I'm too weak." "When did you last eat without medicine to dull your mind?" "The medicine is necessary. The doctors say so." What if the doctors are wrong? Her hands dropped from her eyes. She stared at him, her expression flickering between hope and fear. "What did you say?" Ezekiel turned toward her, his voice low but clear. "I said, what if the doctors are wrong? What if everything you've been told about your condition is meant not to heal you, but to keep you controlled? What if your father has been poisoning you for years to ensure you never become well enough to speak about what you saw?" The room fell into complete silence. Catherine's eyes widened, her hands stilled. For 30 long seconds, she just sat there, processing his words. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "He told you." "Your father told me nothing, miss. But I have eyes. I know mercury poisoning. I know laudanum use. Healthy women do not become like this without someone working hard to make them this way." "Why would you say this?" Suspicion crept into her voice. "This is a trick. You're testing me." Ezekiel leaned in, his voice firm but gentle. I'm telling you, I can help you. I can help you become clear-minded, strong enough to walk out of here. But it won't be easy. Your body has been dependent on those medicines for years. Stopping will hurt. You'll feel worse before you feel better, and your father won't approve. Then why would you do it? Ezekiel met her gaze, unflinching. Because I have my reasons for wanting Silas, Rutald, to suffer. And the best way to make him suffer is to return to him a daughter who is sane enough to remember everything and strong enough to speak about it. The truth hung heavily between them, but Catherine's eyes were sharp, and she seemed to see through the surface, piercing through the manipulation, recognizing something genuine. You want revenge on my father? Yes, miss. What did he do to you? He sold my family, my wife, my son, my daughter. Sent them to their deaths to prove a point. A cruelty that was meant to show the world he could be heartless. Catherine's face hardened. The brethren. He sold them for the brethren. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, and Ezekiel nodded. The brethren? Miss, you don't know them? Not yet. She laughed then, a harsh sound that echoed in the room. You will learn. Everyone learns eventually. She leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. If I agree, if I let you help me, what happens then? You get well, miss, Ezekiel said, his eyes locked on hers. And when you're well, we decide what happens next. We both have our revenge to plan. Perhaps they'll align. Catherine studied him, her eyes searching for any sign of weakness, any hint of betrayal. Finally, she spoke. I want them all dead. My father, Judge Palum, Reverend Crenshaw, every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first, to know what's coming, to beg. Then I want them dead. Her words were a venomous promise, and Ezekiel saw the fire in her eyes. A fire born of years of suppressed rage. He nodded solemnly. Then we have an understanding, Miss Catherine. If we're to be conspirators, use my name. I cannot miss. Not where anyone might hear. We must be careful. Catherine's gaze turned cold. Then know this. Ezekiel, she said, her eyes glittering with menace. I have killed before. 3 people. House slaves who might have told my father about my lucid moments. I can't remember how, but I know I did it. They disappeared. Their families were told they ran away. She smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. So, if you plan to betray me, know that I am not a victim. I am something worse. A chill ran down Ezekiel's spine, but he held his ground. I believe you, miss, and I will not betray you. Good, Catherine said, standing more steadily now. Then let us begin. But I have one condition. Ezekiel raised an eyebrow. When this is over, when we've had our revenge, I want to die. I don't want to live with what I've seen and done. Ezekiel hadn't expected that. But he nodded, agreed. She extended her hand to him, and after a moment's hesitation, Ezekiel shook it. Her grip was firm, strong. Over the next week, Ezekiel began Catherine's treatment. He gradually reduced her laudanum, replacing it with herbal tinctures, valerian root for sleep and anxiety, chamomile for digestion, milk thistle to help her liver process the toxins. The process was painful. Catherine spent 3 days in bed, feverish, trembling, vomiting. Ezekiel stayed by her side, holding a basin when she needed it, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, speaking softly, reminding her she wasn't alone. When the worst of it passed, she was weaker, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. The tremor that had racked her body was gone. Her speech was less slurred. She could read again, focus again. And that's when the real work began. It exhausted her, but he pushed her further every day. He replaced heavy pastries with lean meats and vegetables, strictly limiting portions. She fought him. Years of using food as comfort made restriction feel like torture. While working on her physical recovery, they talked. Catherine revealed the horrors of the cellar she had witnessed at 12. Ezekiel listened, heart clenched, as she recounted the things that made even his strong stomach churn. She spoke of gaslighting, years of being told she was mad, her memories invented, her words untrusted. She spoke of the journal she had kept hidden, pages upon pages filled with dates, names, times her father left late at night, names of mysterious visitors, strange sounds from below. Ezekiel shared his own story, about his family, about Sarah, who sang while working, teaching their children to read despite the constant danger, about Benjamin, a child prodigy, doing math that amazed even the overseers, about Ruth, who found solace in wildflowers and adorned their cabin with blooms to make it beautiful. He told her about Silas, how he had come to the Virginia plantation, inspecting them like livestock, how he purchased the family, then cruelly changed the terms, taking only the woman and children, splitting them up for no reason but the pleasure of it. "That's what I remember most," Ezekiel whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. My son crying, begging me, holding on to my leg as if he could stop me from leaving. My wife trying to be strong, telling Benjamin to be brave, while your father stood there, smiling, taking pleasure in our pain. Catherine's eyes filled with understanding, but there was a cold resolve in them. I'm sorry. I know sorry is just a word, but it's all I can offer. I'm sorry you had to suffer because of what my father is, but you are not responsible for what he does. Ezekiel shook his head. Miss, no. But I am responsible for what I do next. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for everything he's taken from you. He will pay. They will all pay. The announcement was set for April 29th. 40, one of the county's elite gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room. The invitation described it as an important family announcement. The judge, the reverend, the bankers, All arrived in carriages. The meal was extravagant. Oysters, roasted duck, rice dishes, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, and a towering cake for dessert. Catherine sat at her father's right, eating little, speaking only when spoken to, but revealing nothing. Ezekiel moved among the guests, silent as a shadow, refilling glasses and clearing plates. He remained unseen but listened, absorbed every word, filed away every glance, every word spoken. After dessert, Silas stood and tapped his glass. "My friends, thank you for joining us. As you know, Catherine has been unwell for years. We sought every treatment. Doctors from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing helped until recently." He gestured to Ezekiel. "2 weeks ago, I brought in Ezekiel, a man with knowledge of herbal medicine. As you can see, Catherine is much improved. Calm, clear, more herself than she has been in years." Polite murmurs filled the air. Catherine's expression remained neutral, but Ezekiel could see her hands, clutching her napkin beneath the table. "This improvement," Silas continued, "has led to a difficult decision. Catherine requires ongoing care more intensive than what our household can provide. After much consideration, I've decided Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare. He will have complete authority over her care, daily activities, and living arrangements, effective immediately." The murmurs changed. Confusion rippled across the room. Some guests exchanged confused glances. Mrs. Pelham's face registered shock. Marcus Fanning spoke up. "Silas, I do not understand. You are placing your daughter under a slave's care, permanently." "I am placing her with someone who succeeded where others failed. My daughter's health is more important than social convention." "But surely," Reverend Crenshaw interrupted, "there are other options. A companion, a nurse, someone more appropriate." Silas's expression darkened. "I've made my decision." Catherine agrees. "Do you not, daughter?" All eyes turned to Catherine. This was her moment to refuse, to expose everything, to shatter the lie and bring it all crashing down. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled, small, controlled, her face giving nothing away. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind, and his treatments have helped. I am content with this arrangement." Perfectly delivered. But Ezekiel saw what others did not. Her knuckles were white, gripping that napkin, her eyes flashing with violence. She was playing the role, the obedient daughter, but inside she was screaming. The evening passed awkwardly. Some guests left early. Others stayed to speak with Silas privately, asking questions they didn't want to ask out loud. Ezekiel caught pieces of conversation. "Are you certain this is wise? What will people say? The brethren will not approve of this becoming public." The last comment came from Judge Pelham, his voice low, near the study. Silas' response was too quiet to hear, but whatever he said made Pelham nod and clap his shoulder. By midnight, all guests had left. Catherine retired to her room. Silas went to his study. Ezekiel helped with cleanup and then made his way upstairs. He knocked softly on Catherine's door. "Come in." She sat by the window, still in her dinner dress, staring out at the dark grounds. She didn't turn. "It is done, then. I am officially your responsibility. Property of property. How absurd." "How are you feeling, miss?" "I want to burn this house down with everyone in it. But we must be patient." "Isn't that what you tell me?" "Yes, miss. I agreed because I want them to feel secure. I want them to think this is just my father's eccentricity. I want them to forget about me while we work." She turned to look at him. "Did you see their faces? The disgust, the pity. They think I am pathetic. They have no idea what we are planning." "And what exactly are we planning, miss?" Catherine moved to her dresser and pulled out a wooden box. Inside were papers, her handwriting scrawled across them. "I've been documenting everything for years. Dates, names, ritual descriptions. Coded so it looks like nonsense to anyone who finds it. But I can decode it. We have enough to destroy 20 men. And will anyone believe us, miss? A woman recently recovered from madness and an enslaved man. No. Which is why we need proof. They can't dismiss real physical evidence." She pulled out one page. "I know where they keep their records. The Brethren maintains a ledger of all activities. Every ritual, every sacrifice, every member's participation. It ensures everyone is equally guilty. My father mentioned it years ago, before he realized I would remember. Where is it?" "In the cellar. There's a hidden room beyond the main chamber. I never saw inside, but I overheard them talk about it. That's where they keep everything they cannot afford to lose." Other Ezekiel felt the mix of excitement and dread. A ledger like that would be devastating evidence. But getting it meant going into the heart of the Brethren's domain. We need to access it when the house is quiet. My father travels to Charleston monthly for business. The next trip is May 14th. He'll be gone for 3 days. That gives us 2 weeks to prepare. We need the cellar layout, every room, every hiding place. I can help. I've been thinking about this for 16 years. I know exactly what needs to happen. They spent an hour going over details, speaking in hushed tones. Catherine sketched the cellar layout from memory. Ezekiel asked about guards, keys, and slave schedules. When he left her room, it was nearly 200 in the morning. His mind raced. He was fully committed now, in conspiracy with a woman who was brilliant, damaged, and terrifying. I'm doing this for you, for Sarah, for Benjamin, for Ruth, for every person who suffered, because men like Silas, Rutland believe power gives them the right to destroy lives. My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options. And the man represents an opportunity. What opportunity? Reverend Crenshaw asked. To test something I have long believed, that a person can be drawn into our work through their own actions if framed correctly. Silas turned to Ezekiel. You want revenge on me. You want to destroy me for what I did to your family. I understand that. But what if I offered you a different kind of revenge, a more meaningful one? I do not understand, Ezekiel said carefully. I am offering you membership, not as an equal. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members, but as an associate. You would attend our gatherings, participate in rituals, and in exchange, I would give you what you want most. My family is dead. You cannot give me what I want. No. But I can give you revenge against the people who killed them. The plantation owner in Alabama who worked your wife and children to death. His name is Edward Gaines. He is not part of the Brethren. He has no protection from us. If you join us, prove your loyalty. I will give you resources to destroy him. Money, information. Whatever you need to make him suffer as you have suffered. The offer hung in the air, obscene in its calculation. Join the men who destroyed his family to get revenge on another monster. And if I refuse, then you and Catherine both die tonight. Your bodies go into the swamp. No one will ever know what happened. The papers Catherine was copying will be burned. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues as it always has. Silas spread his hands. But if you accept, you live. Catherine lives. You get your revenge. All it costs is your soul. Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the slightest shake of her head. Do not do it. Whatever happens, do not become them. But Ezekiel was thinking about accepting, about getting inside their organization, about gathering more evidence, about buying time. He looked back at Silas and Catherine. What happens to her? She returns to her room, resumes her medications, forgets what she has seen. The alternative is she dies alongside you. No. Catherine's voice cut across the chamber. I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Kill me, if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are. Silas's expression hardened. Then you have made your choice. Wet. Ezekiel spoke quickly. I accept. But on one condition, Catherine goes free. Not back to her room. Free. Let her leave this house. Leave South Carolina. Give her money to start over. If you do that, I will join you. Several Brethren members shook their heads, but Judge Pelham spoke. The boy makes a point. The girl is already broken. Even if she spoke, who would believe her? But a man willing to join us to be complicit, that is valuable. That proves our power extends even to those who hate us. Silas considered. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have associates in Philadelphia who will take her in. She will be given a new identity and stipend to live on. But she can never return to South Carolina. Never contact anyone from her old life. She will be dead to everyone here. Agreed? Catherine stared at Ezekiel. No, I will not leave you too. Agreed? Ezekiel interrupted. She goes free. I join you. Then we have a bargain. Silas turned to the others. Catherine leaves tomorrow. Ezekiel's initiation will be in 3 weeks at the next regular gathering. Until then, he remains at Cypress Grove under watch. If he tries to escape or contact anyone, the deal is void and both die. Understood? Ezekiel nodded. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but Ezekiel caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Trust me. Catherine left the next morning. A closed carriage took her away at dawn. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window as it rolled down the long drive and disappeared into the trees. She had not been allowed to say goodbye. He had not been allowed to speak with her after the confrontation in the cellar. But as she had been escorted to her room the previous night, she had looked back at him once, and in her eyes he had seen something that gave him hope. She understood. She knew he had not truly surrendered. She knew this was strategy, not defeat. The question was whether she would actually go to Philadelphia or whether she had her own plans. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Ezekiel's life. He was kept under constant watch. 2 overseers followed him everywhere. He was not allowed to leave the plantation grounds. He was given menial work, keep him occupied, meaningless tasks that accomplished nothing, but filled time. But he was also given access to the main house, to the study, where Silas kept his papers, to the cellar where the next gathering would take place. They were watching him, yes, but they were also testing him, seeing if he would try to escape, seeing if he would attempt sabotage. Ezekiel did neither. He played the role of the defeated man who had made a pragmatic choice for survival. He was quiet, obedient, asked no questions, caused no problems. But he was observing everything, learning the routines of the house, noting which slaves could be trusted, which overseers were cruel, which brethren members visited regularly. He was building a mental map of how everything worked, looking for weaknesses. And at night, alone in his cabin, he thought about what was coming. His initiation would require participation in their rituals. They would test him. They would want to make him complicit in something horrible, so he could never expose them without destroying himself. He thought about how far he was willing to go, what lines he would not cross, even for revenge, whether there was any act so terrible that justice did not justify it. He did not have good answers to those questions. On June 2nd, the night before his initiation, Silas came to his cabin. It was late after midnight. Ezekiel woke to knocking and opened the door to find his owner standing there alone. "May I come in?" Ezekiel stepped aside. Silas entered and looked around the sparse room. Finally, he spoke. "Tomorrow, you will become one of us. Not fully, never fully, but enough. I want you to understand what that means." "I understand what I agreed to." "Do you? Do you truly?" Silas sat on the single chair uninvited. The Brethren has existed for 43 years. In that time, we have never lost a member to exposure. Never had someone break our code of silence. Do you know why? Because everyone is equally guilty. Partly, but also because we take care of each other. A man joins the Brethren, and suddenly doors open. Business opportunities appear. Legal problems disappear. Enemies find themselves in difficulty. We are not just a society, Ezekiel. We are a network of power that extends across the entire South. Once you are part of that network, even as an associate, you will have access to resources you cannot imagine. And in exchange, I help you murder people. Ezekiel said quietly. Silas did not flinch. In exchange, you help us maintain the natural order, the strong over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. That is how the world has always worked. We simply acknowledge it and use it to our advantage. You killed my family to demonstrate your commitment to that order. I did, and I would do it again, because sentiment is weakness. Love is weakness. The moment you allow yourself to care more about individuals than about power, you have already lost. Silas leaned forward. But here is what I want you to understand. Your family is dead. Nothing you do will change that. But you can ensure their deaths meant something. You can use the power the Brethren offers to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. You can work from inside our organization to make changes, to push for less brutal treatment of slaves, to advocate for better conditions. You will have a voice at our table that is worth something. It was almost convincing. Almost. The idea that Ezekiel could become some kind of reformer from within, using his position to help others. But he knew it was a trap, a rationalization. The moment he participated in their rituals, he would be compromised. The moment he accepted their power, he would be corrupted by it. Why are you telling me this? Ezekiel asked. Because I want you to succeed. Because having you as an ally is more valuable than having you as an enemy. Because I killed your family, but I do not want to kill you. Silas stood. Tomorrow night, you will be asked to do something difficult. Something that will test whether you truly commit to this path. I am telling you now, whatever you are asked to do, do it. Do not hesitate. Do not show weakness, because if you fail the test, both you and Catherine die. Yes, I know she is not really in Philadelphia. I know she is hiding somewhere planning her own revenge. But I have people watching for her. The moment she surfaces, if you have not proven yourself, she will be found and killed. Do you understand? Ice flooded through Ezekiel. Catherine was alive, but she was in danger, and his actions tomorrow would determine whether she lived or died. I understand, he said quietly. Silas nodded and left without another word. Ezekiel sat alone in the dark cabin, thinking about the impossible position he was in. He had to participate in something monstrous tomorrow, had to prove himself to monsters, had to become complicit in evil, or he had to find another way. A third option that neither Silas nor the brethren anticipated. He pulled out the paper with his family's names, looked at them in the moonlight coming through the window. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for what I'm about to do, for what I have to become. I promise you it will not be for nothing." The gathering began at midnight on June 3rd. Ezekiel was brought to the cellar by two brethren members who stripped him to the waist and tied his hands behind his back. They led him down the stairs into the candlelit chamber where all 13 members waited in their robes. Silas stood at the altar's head. Brothers of the harvest, tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any in our history. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to hate us, a man who has lost everything because of what we represent. We do this to prove that our power extends even to our enemies, that anyone can be brought into the fold if the price is right. He gestured, and two more brethren members brought forward a figure bound and gagged, struggling weakly. They placed the person on the altar and stepped back. It was a young woman, enslaved, maybe 18 or 19 years old, terrified. "This is your test." "Ezekiel," Silas said. "To join us, you must participate in our ritual. You must take the knife and make the first cut. You must prove that your desire for revenge against Gaines is stronger than your moral objections to our methods. If you refuse, you die here tonight. If you accept, you become one of us, and we help you destroy the man who killed your family." The other brethren members began chanting low, rhythmic sounds in a language Ezekiel did not recognize. The candles flickered. Shadows danced on the walls. Silas held out a knife. Long blade, wickedly sharp handle wrapped in leather. "Take it. Make the choice." Ezekiel looked at the woman on the altar. She was crying, trying to scream through the gag. Her eyes found his, and in them he saw every enslaved person who had ever suffered at the hands of people like the brethren. He saw Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. He looked at the knife, at Silas, at the 13 men watching to see what he would do. This was the moment. The point where he would either become a monster or die resisting. But there was a third option, one he had been planning for 3 weeks, one that required perfect timing and absolute commitment. He took the knife. The brethren members nodded approvingly. Silas smiled. The chanting increased in intensity. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar. The woman's eyes went wide with terror. He raised the knife, and then he moved not toward the woman, but toward the nearest brethren member. The knife flashed in the candlelight and buried itself in the man's throat before anyone could react. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Ezekiel grabbed the fallen member's robe, pulling it off in one motion. He threw it over the nearest candles, plunging half the room into darkness. Chaos erupted. He moved through the confusion like violence incarnate. Years of rage focused into action. He grabbed another man, using him as a shield as someone swung at him. Threw the body into two more members, tangling them, kicked out at a knee, heard bone crack, grabbed a candle holder, and smashed it into a face. The brethren were powerful men, but they were not fighters. They were soft, privileged, used to others doing violence for them. Ezekiel was none of those things. He fought toward the altar, where the woman lay, grabbed her, cut her bonds with the knife he had somehow kept hold of. "Run!" He shouted up the stairs. "Run!" She scrambled off the altar and fled. Ezekiel turned back to face the remaining brethren members, 7 of them still standing, blocking the stairs. "You have made a terrible mistake," Silas said, his voice steady despite the carnage. "You have killed yourself and Catherine both." "Maybe," Ezekiel said, "but I will take as many of you with me as I can." What he did not know was that above them in the main house, Catherine had returned. She had never gone to Philadelphia. She had been hiding in the slave quarters, waiting, planning, gathering allies among the enslaved people of Cypress Grove. And when she heard the commotion from the cellar, when she saw the young woman burst from the kitchen screaming, she knew it was time. The reckoning. Catherine had spent 3 weeks recruiting. She had moved from plantation to plantation, under cover of darkness. Speaking to enslaved people, she had known her whole life. People who had watched her grow up, who had suffered under her father's ownership. She told them about the brethren, about the cellar, about the rituals, and she told them that tonight was the night they could end it. 23 people came, men and women who had nothing left to lose, who had lost children to the brethren's rituals, who had watched friends disappear into the swamps, who had endured decades of brutality from men who believed themselves untouchable. They came armed with tools from the fields, axes, sickles, hammers. They came with rage that had been building for generations. When the young woman burst from the cellar, Catherine led them down. The brethren members, others still trying to subdue Ezekiel, did not hear them coming until it was too late. The enslaved people flooded into the cellar like a tide. There was no mercy in what followed, no hesitation. These were people who had been told their entire lives they were property, that their suffering did not matter. that their lives had no value. Now they were proving how wrong those beliefs were. The brethren tried to fight. Judge Pelham pulled a pistol, but was struck down before he could fire. Reverend Crenshaw begged for mercy and received none. Marcus Fanning tried to flee up the stairs and was dragged back down. Silas Rutland, seeing everything collapse around him, tried one last desperate play. He grabbed Catherine, pulling her to him with a knife at her throat. "Stop. Stop, or I kill her." The room went still. Catherine looked at her father with no fear in her eyes. "Do it. Kill me. It changes nothing. You have already lost. I can still escape." "You can still nothing." Catherine's voice was cold. "You spent 16 years trying to break me, trying to make me forget, trying to convince me I was mad. But you failed. I remembered everything, and I am going to watch you die." She drove her elbow back into his ribs with sudden vicious force. His grip loosened. She spun away. And before Silas could recover, Ezekiel was there. They faced each other, the enslaved man and the plantation owner. All the power Silas had held, all the privilege and cruelty, all the years of believing himself untouchable. None of it mattered now. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said quietly. "My wife, my children, my life. You did it for no reason except that you could, to prove something to men who valued cruelty over humanity." "Please," Silas said. Just that one word, pathetic and desperate. Did my wife say please? Did my son? Did any of the people you killed in this cellar? Ezekiel shook his head. "No mercy. Not for you. Not ever." What happened next was brutal and final. The enslaved people made sure none of the brethren survived. 13 men, who had believed themselves above consequence, learned in their final moments that power was an illusion, that cruelty always came home eventually. When it was over, Catherine stood in the center of the cellar, surrounded by bodies. She was shaking, not from fear, but from release. 16 years of rage finally given outlet. Ezekiel came to her. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are you?" "Minor cuts. Nothing serious." He looked around at the carnage. "What do we do now?" "Now." Catherine's smile was grim. "Now we burn it all. The cellar, the ledger, the evidence. We destroy every trace of what happened here. But that evidence could prove what they did. Could bring justice." "Justice?" Catherine laughed bitterly. Ezekiel looked around. "This is justice. The only kind we were ever going to get. If we try to take that ledger to authorities, what happens? We are hunted down and killed. The surviving brethren members in other counties come for us. This only ends if everyone believes the Cypress Grove chapter died in an accident. If there is no evidence, no witnesses, no story to tell." She was right, and Ezekiel knew it. "Then we burn it." They spent the next 2 hours preparing. The enslaved people who had helped them left before dawn. disappearing back to their various plantations. They would say nothing. They had seen nothing. They knew nothing. That was how survival worked. Catherine and Ezekiel poured oil through the cellar, stacked wood and kindling, placed the bodies in positions that might look like an accident if anyone investigated. Then they took the ledger and all the journals and placed them in the center of the altar. "Wait," Ezekiel said. He opened the ledger one last time and found the entries about his family. He carefully tore out those pages and folded them, placing them inside his shirt. "For them, so they are not forgotten." Catherine nodded. Then she took a candle and held it to the oil-soaked wood. The fire caught immediately. Within minutes, the cellar was ablaze. Here's the improved version of your script without headings. My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other options. And the man represents an opportunity. What opportunity? Reverend Crenshaw asked. To test something I have long believed, that a person can be drawn into our work through their own actions if framed correctly. Silas turned to Ezekiel. You want revenge on me. You want to destroy me for what I did to your family. I understand that. But what if I offered you a different kind of revenge? A more meaningful one. I do not understand. Ezekiel said carefully, I am offering you membership, not as an equal. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members, but as an associate. You would attend our gatherings, participate in rituals, and in exchange, I would give you what you want most. My family is dead. You cannot give me what I want. No. But I can give you revenge against the people who killed them. The plantation owner in Alabama who worked your wife and children to death. His name is Edward Gaines. He is not part of the Brethren. He has no protection from us. If you join us, prove your loyalty, I will give you resources to destroy him. Money, information. Whatever you need to make him suffer, as you have suffered. The offer hung in the air, obscene in its calculation. Join the men who destroyed his family to get revenge on another monster. And if I refuse, then you and Catherine both die tonight. Your bodies go into the swamp. No one will ever know what happened. The papers Catherine was copying will be burned. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues as it always has. Silas spread his hands. But if you accept, you live. Catherine lives. You get your revenge. All it costs is your soul. Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the slightest shake of her head. Do not do it. Whatever happens, do not become them. But Ezekiel was thinking about accepting, about getting inside their organization, about gathering more evidence, about buying time. He looked back at Silas and Catherine. What happens to her? She returns to her room, resumes her medications, forgets what she has seen. The alternative is she dies alongside you, No. Catherine's voice cut across the chamber. I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Kill me if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are. Silas's expression hardened. Then you have made your choice. Wait. Ezekiel spoke quickly. I accept. But on one condition, Catherine goes free. Not back to her room. Free. Let her leave this house. Leave South Carolina. Give her money to start over. If you do that, I will join you. Several Brethren members shook their heads, but Judge Palum spoke. The boy makes a point. The girl is already broken. Even if she spoke, who would believe her? But a man willing to join us to be complicit, that is valuable. That proves our power extends even to those who hate us. Silas considered. Finally, he nodded and stood in the yard, watching as flames engulfed Cypress, Grove Plantation. The inferno lit up the sky, casting long shadows across the dark landscape. The crackling of burning wood filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence between them. Neither spoke, each consumed by the weight of what they had just done. As the fire raged, they both understood that there was no going back. The world they had known, the plantation, the family, the Brethren, all of it was being reduced to ash. And in that moment, they knew that nothing would ever be the same again. People would come. Other plantations would see the smoke. There would be questions, but Catherine and Ezekiel had their story prepared. A terrible accident. A candle knocked over in the cellar. The master and his guests trapped below. So tragic, so terrible, no one would ever know the truth. As the sun began to rise over the burning ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. What will you do now? Go north, he replied, his voice steady. Use the chaos of this fire to disappear. Maybe find others who want to fight, to create a network that can help people escape. He pulled out the paper with his family's names. Looking at them, one last time, the moonlight from the window casting an eerie glow over the ink. I cannot bring them back, he said quietly. But I can make sure others do not suffer the same fate. She paused, looking at him, the fire reflecting in her eyes. And I will go north as well, she said, a slight hesitation in her voice. Use the money I've been stealing from my father's accounts for years. Start over. She looked at the burning house one last time. But I will not forget, she added. I will document everything that happened here. I will write it all down so that someday, somehow, someone knows the truth. Ezekiel nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The truth had to survive, even if it could never be revealed in their lifetimes. They'll seal the records. They'll seal your testimony too, if you try to make it public. Then I'll hide it. Catherine replied with resolve. I'll code it. I'll leave it somewhere to be found decades from now, when we're all dead and it cannot hurt us anymore." She looked at the house, the smoke still rising from the wreckage. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. And with that, they walked away in opposite directions. Catherine heading north toward Charleston, then eventually to Philadelphia, and Ezekiel west toward the frontier, where enslaved people could disappear into communities that asked no questions. They never saw each other again. The official story was exactly as they had planned. A tragic accident. Silas Rutald and 12 prominent gentlemen meeting at Cypress Grove to discuss business when a fire broke out. All 13 perished in the cellar, overcome by smoke before they could escape. A terrible loss for Colleton County. Funerals with full honors. Eulogies praising their contributions to society. Catherine Rutald was reported to have died in the fire as well. Her father's mad daughter, trapped in her room, unable to escape. A particularly sad footnote to an already tragic event. No one questioned it. No one looked too closely. The enslaved people who had participated said nothing. They had no reason to speak, and every reason to remain silent. Most were sold within months to different plantations as Cypress Grove was liquidated. They scattered across South Carolina and beyond, carrying their secret with them to their graves. Years passed. The ruins of Cypress Grove were eventually demolished. The land sold, new buildings constructed. Life moved on as it always does, covering over the past with the present. But whispers persisted. Stories told in slave quarters late at night about the plantation where the masters burned. About the night justice came to men who thought themselves untouchable. About the woman and the man who made it happen. The stories changed with each telling, becoming legend, becoming myth. But the core remained. That cruelty had consequences. That power was not absolute. That sometimes the powerless found their power. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops occupied the area where Cypress Grove had stood. They found evidence of old tunnels beneath the property, found bones in the nearby swamp, found markings on trees that suggested ritual sites. But the war moved on, and no one had time to investigate further. In 1971, during demolition work, a journal was found sealed in a wall. It detailed everything: names, dates, rituals, victims. But as Catherine had predicted, it was coded. And before anyone could fully decode it, the journal vanished from county records. Some say it was destroyed. Others say it was taken by descendants of the Brethren families protecting their ancestors' secrets. A few believe it still exists somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered when the time is right. What is known as this 13 prominent men died in a fire in 1841. Catherine Rutald disappeared shortly afterward, though no body was ever confirmed found. An enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross was reported sold to a plantation in Alabama, but no record of the transaction exists. And for years afterward, stories circulated among enslaved communities about a network helping people escape, led by a man who had faced the monster and won. Whether those stories were true or just wishful thinking, no one can say for certain. But sometimes truth lives not in official records, but in the stories people tell, in the memories they keep, in the justice they remember, even when history tries to forget. This mystery shows us that power built on cruelty is never as solid as it seems. That secrets kept in darkness eventually find light. That the people deemed powerless often hold the most dangerous power of all. The power of witness, the power of memory, the power of refusing to forget. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Do you think that journal still exists somewhere waiting to be found? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between history and horror. These stories need to be remembered. These voices need to be heard. See you in the next video.